Okay, thank you, Tim, Gavin, Peter, Marty. Very informative, and I hope a few questions have been raised out of their presentations. So, in doing my best Tony Jones impersonation, we'll open it up to a bit of a Q&A. So we have some roving mics out there. If you have any burning questions, want to ask about, what you see as working well, some challenges you may face, then fire away. We've got some experts here for you. It's always hard being first, isn't it?
Hi, my name is Renee. I work on the waterfront with a largely ageing male-dominated workforce, blue collar. I was wondering if you had any strategies for developing those leadership skills within the workforce with a group of people that traditionally don't want to think about those sorts of things.
Great question. Who would you like to answer that one? Or would anyone like to volunteer? Go, Peter. You've got a microphone there, mate. I think it should be on.
Testing. I think it also comes down to the process as well. So to develop those leadership skills, and I'm a big one for the engagement, you probably have to find out what, those group of workers, engagement through workers and also engagement through management, what you actually want to achieve and what it is. I've got no doubt for an ageing workforce, and it doesn't matter the age, that they want to make improvements. I think it's nearly getting to the stage, it's a bit of a myth that older ageing workers don't want to make those improvements, whether it be health, wellbeing, career, improving skills. I think the opportunities are definitely there, and the process of how you go about it is very important. Purely from a health and wellbeing perspective, and that example I showed with Intercast, it's a good learning curve for me as well. I was very surprised at some of the participation from that demographic because of the outcomes of the process. So I think there's a lot to learn from that, and it's not just them, it's other companies, and it's through a whole range of different industries as well. So I know I don't completely answer it in regards to leadership, but I think that process will bring out that leadership.
Thanks. Anyone else want to? Yeah.
And agree with all of that, that's the way to start. And I think it's a perfect example for an integrated approach because there's also aspects on the side of what can happen at work, as well as why workers might want to improve their health, and they probably want to improve their health to be healthy for longer, but possibly to work for longer. So I think on the other side it would be the transition to retirement policies and what is the company thinking about with its ageing workforce. So I assume they want to keep them for longer, but we know that workers who are getting older want to work differently. So as well as the physical things they've got to deal with, they need smoother floors, they sometimes have trouble with vision and hearing, they sometimes take longer to learn, but they've got a lot of experience. We also know that they want to work more flexibly. They want to be able to have time off, they maybe want to have reduced hours. So there's a real potential here to say we've got a problem, exactly as Peter's saying, let's try and understand the dimensions of this and what people are thinking and what they might like to see, but to build an integrated solution which tackles what can happen in the working environment as well as what you can do to help them to keep healthier.
And I think, adding to everyone else, I think in relation to, obviously leadership's key, but I think I've found just about any organisation, there's always those people that are really passionate about health and wellbeing. So it's actually finding those champions. So then you can actually start working together. So whether that's through, depending on your size, whether you want to form some kind of wellbeing committee or run it through your WHS committee, but getting those passionate people on board, it does mean that you've got those champions that really can help integrate wellbeing into the workplace and be an example to everyone else as well. A bit like Peter with the giving up smoking or weight loss challenge, and how you got one champion, and then from that it really grew.
And just a final point, just adding to that, and I think Peter alluded to this, finding out what the business case is for those people, whether they're managers or leaders of the organisation. If you find out what they want, you can start the conversation with them there and start the action there. So online, for example, we've got FAQs for managers around how to build a business case, or FAQs for leaders. So that might be a good starting point.
Thanks. Question down the back here. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Morag. I'm from the secondary education sector. A lot of the really good work that's being done around healthy minds and workplaces seems to stem from organisations that traditionally have been high-risk organisations, industry, manufacturing, farming, etc. So there's not a lot of work that I see that's being done in the education space. We hear about high burnout of teachers, etc. But the incidence of mental health, unhealth, mental wellbeing, poor mental wellbeing is really high in this sector. And I'm just curious if any of you are aware of any leading edge work that's being done in the secondary education space.
There is stuff around. So I remember developing material for Victoria, but it was done from a prevention of harm point of view. So it was taking how to deal with occupational stress in schools from the point of view of staff. We're at the era that we're in now, I think another model would be the international movement, which is called Healthy Universities, and then you could adapt that back to secondary education, because the Healthy Universities approach really links in the wellbeing of students strongly with the wellbeing of staff. And I think that's quite a powerful way to approach it. And there's an organisation called Healthy Universities in the UK, and they're the leaders internationally. There are a few universities in Australia that are picking up on it. University of Sydney is probably the leader, and they're really taking a strong integrated approach. And the Healthy Universities website has got quite a good audit tool that you can do easily. You know, you have to register, but then you get access to the audit tool. So I think if I were doing it, that's where I'd start now.
I'd also suggest contacting Beyond Blue. Beyond Blue have a workplace engagement area, and they are doing work in a number of industries. Somewhere in the back of my head, I think education may be one of them. So certainly if you would like to come and see me afterwards, I can give you a contact at Beyond Blue where you might be able to explore that in greater detail.
Hi, I work for the public sector. The stuff around productivity is really interesting. We have heaps of data, but I don't know how to capture or measure or report on presenteeism or productivity or that kind of thing. And if I did try to present something, I don't know how I'd argue that it was because of a wellbeing integrated program that caused that increase. So do you have suggestions of what we should be looking at to capture that kind of information?
Very good question. You'll notice the slide that I put up there said there was a correlation rather than a causal. I think we're still trying to unpack the causal. And again, I think the issue within the public sector is this relationship. I mean, it's much easier in the private sector where you can measure direct profitability. And so the study that was done by the University of New South Wales and ANU actually looked at those 6 domains, but also tied it together with financials. So they were able to see quite clearly the ones with, I guess, that showed all the elements of high-performing workplaces with those high levels of profitability, hence the bell curve. Public sector is harder to do that with because the outcomes are I was going to say nebulous, but the attribution between action and result in some parts of the public sector can be quite difficult, and the timelines for actually getting a change in whatever you're measuring can be much longer than it is in the private sector. I mean, profits you can see almost on a monthly basis, right? But when you're talking about reductions in recidivism, you know, you're looking at a long period of time, and there's obviously multiple factors involved in that, you know, cyclical things in the economy and a whole bunch of things. So I've sort of answered the question, but not answered the question in the sense that it's hard. But if we assume that what makes people productive and the experience, the employee experience that they have in the private sector, that in a sense, in a lot of your day-to-day work settings, they're sort of similar. You know, you go to a place which has got a desk and it's got an environment and it's got, you know, it's either got fresh water there or it hasn't, or it's got a fruit bowl or it hasn't, or you've got managers that show empathy. Those things are actually quite transferable, regardless of what you're trying to achieve.
And I agree completely that it is hard to measure productivity in a very definitive sense. But my experience, which is really quite considerable now of having conversations at the executive level about this, is that if you can actually show that there are some changes in the employee opinion survey results, or you can show that there are changes in absenteeism in particular, and as well workers' compensation claims rates. All of those the public sector is sensitive to, and usually they will be able to make those connections. They're the kinds of metrics that they are interested in, and even if you can't then directly draw a link to productivity gains, they will make that link. So I think that there are enough routine administrative HR metrics that are being used that you can hang your hat on.
I know that we're not as big as the public sector, but at Return to Work SA, we've been running our wellbeing strategy for about 6 years, and every 2 years we send out a employee survey, and we've been able to show that our engagement levels have gone up through a certain survey tool that we use, and also we use workability index. That's a lead indicator of the risk of early exit from the workplace, workabilities and being able to meet demands of the job. And again, we've been able to show an improvement in workability index. And I know that they actually have, through the organisational development, worked out their return on investment in a formal manner in relation to our wellbeing program, but I don't know the details of that.
I think there was a question down here. Carol, thank you.
Hi, I'm Charles. I work in the tertiary education sector, and I want to ask 2 questions, if I can, slightly different topics, both coming out of discussions from previous questions.
Can you
First
do
one
at a time?
Yes, I will. So the first one is about the education sector and the fact that high degree research students, there's a bit of study recently around saying that they have high levels of mental health stress, and it's a slightly different environment to a normal worker relationship. So I was just wondering on the panel's opinion about that difference in that relationship between a research student that is there full-time in a working environment but under high stress levels to produce the results of their research degree within a short period of time, and ways that we can manage that. So that's the first question. The second question is around the work environment. There's a lot of information at the moment encouraging workplaces around hot desking, flexible work environments, the Google, Apple, I suppose, style of work environments. And from my perspective, I'm really not sure about whether the data is there to back up that is actually helping with worker productivity, worker wellbeing in the work environment, because the more open plan workplaces you have, from what I'm seeing, they become quieter and less discussion occurs in those environments. So those are the 2 questions I have.
Charles, I'll start with number 2. Really interesting around the hot desking and flexible working arrangements, and you've got to wonder about the connectedness. And I know in our workplace that's the situation. Very flexible working environments, and some workers you don't get to see all the time. You don't get to have a conversation with. And then you look at the mental health stats that I put up on the screen from a critical risk around suicide and also anxiety, depression. 3 million people with that in Australia per year. It's a bit of a worry, and I'm not going to give you the exact answer, but I think that I think that it could potentially be doing harm, but I think the workplace also has a responsibility to be able to roll out what that should actually look like in relation to flexible working arrangements and hot desks, and how they can support their workers to be both physically healthy and mentally healthy. And Marty mentioned a few really good resources around that can be accessed from different sectors. And I'm almost certain, Marty, that the sort of university sector would come under that as well, and small business and that. So there might be some really good tips to put in place for that.
The PhD one, those kinds of issues have come up in the Healthy Universities resource, and one of the things that they're doing is they are having another look at assessment design, for example, in students, to try and optimise the design of assessments. And the problems with PhD are often the variability in the quality of the supervision. So it depends on the luck of the draw, really. Sometimes you get people who are supervising in a very supportive way, and the contact is appropriate and frequent, and you're getting the support. And other times you feel like you're completely alone, not quite sure about what you're doing, and it's a kind of a make or break it right at the end. They don't get enough feedback on how they're going. So it is something that's discussed, and they're the kinds of issues that are being addressed. So again, the Healthy Universities material might help there.
Thanks. I have a question. It's a two-part question for all panel members. The first one's very easy. Are you convinced that integrated approaches are the way forward for South Australian workplaces? That's a yes or no. The second part of the question is, I'd like the one thing, if possible, that convinced you, whether that be an example or an aha moment, or the one thing that you went, yep, that's the way forward. So who wants to kick us off?
Anyone who says no can hop off the panel now. That's part one answered for you.
Yep.
No. My aha moment was when I looked at one of the many models of integrated approaches, and there's lots of different pictures of them. But the moment I saw HR, OHS and health promotion together and went, oh yeah, why are we doing this separately? So that was my aha moment.
Very good.
I'm going to talk about my Mancrush now. I had the very great fortune, literally 12 months ago, to be in Victoria for the Safe Work Month event in Victoria, where I heard Professor Wagner speak about the integrated approach. And I've just started this project at Safe Work SA, and I'm thinking, this integrated approach, this is just another government term that I've got to get my head around. What does this actually mean? And he described very succinctly the importance of always thinking about what's the change to work conditions and environments that we want to make, how to engage with the workforce to make that change, and if we can get that right, then wellbeing will be far more successful. And we had the great fortune, I was with one of Nadia's staff, we were in a one-on-one with him, and he was pretty convincing. So I became a convert, absolutely. And it's just been wonderful to have Nikki here as well, reinforcing the Total Worker Health Program from NEOSH, reinforcing the models and why we should all be investing in this. I think it's still easier said than done. We've been having a crack at Safe Work SA for the last 12 months, but it's inevitable. It's just something we've got to get our heads around. And I think it's great that the examples are building. The one I touched on, small business case study in the farming community, if we were to really simplify this, one of my colleagues from our marketing team who was with me when we were capturing testimonials, and she summed it up beautifully because she'd met probably 10 small businesses as part of building testimonials. There's something about all these successful businesses, they seem to be smart and kind. And I think if we can think about that around building a culture of care, that's the key in developing the integrated approach.
Okay, the burden I have in life is that under Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ, right? For those that are familiar with that, I'm introverted and highly reflective. So for me, this was a slow dawning as opposed to a moment of truth where I sort of woke up and, aha, this is it. But I think just by doing some reading around, people like Peter Senge and the like, becoming aware that it's empathy, it's teams, it's people, it's diversity, it's being respectful of other people's opinions and that sort of thing within a workplace that actually builds a healthy, caring, supporting environment. And from that, everything else comes. So go back to that framework that I had up with the 6 elements. If you get the people stuff right, the innovation comes, the productivity comes, the fairness comes. It all starts to fall into place. So this integrated approach around, I guess, the well-being and the safety, it's, Jacinda's right. It sits under everything that we aspire to further up the chain in terms of aspiration. So if we're more civil to each other, I think everything else falls into place. So that's, for me, that was the slow dawning over the years of I guess, working within teams and then having to manage teams.
Thanks, Tim. I'm the absolute opposite to you. I'm an extrovert, but I will say that I absolutely believe in the integrated approach and all of Nikki's research. I'm meeting with companies on a daily basis, and the first thing you ask is, what do you actually do? And if you look at 10 years ago, a professional say, I work in safety, or I work in HR, or I work in management. Today you ask, what do you do? Well, I manage HR, safety, management, all of it together, and a few of you are probably nodding your head saying I fit into that category. And that's probably a sign of the times. And I'm actually looking at that from a perspective of the work that Nikki does to say, this could actually be a good thing. If you're under those umbrellas and those banners and you've got a clear vision of what you want to integrate and your outcomes, that could be a real positive. The Foundry example for me about smoking programs and having smoke in the Foundry, that's also something that came straight to my mind to look a little bit more laterally, and good thinkers will in your workplace, which hopefully you guys will actually be able to do that. So some real positives from my point of view.
I suppose I've got two. I've got one way back when, in 1985, and I was dealing with this problem of the resistance to workplace health promotion and really thinking, but why? Why would you resist this? And so I was preparing a presentation and I sat down and I wrote a slide out that had on one side OHS and on the other side workplace health promotion, and what are the characteristics of each. And I realised that they're completely complementary. They're the opposite of each other in many ways, and they fix up each other's emissions. Each of them have their strengths, but together they're so much more powerful. So it was when I was doing that slide, sitting in my office, sort of thinking, oh my God, I've got to go and face this opposition and talk to an audience that is going to not want to hear what I have to say. And that was a real moment. And then the other real moment happened relatively recently, and it's when the evaluation of some of the work that we were doing in WorkSafe Victoria came out, and the researcher came back, and she had her own way of saying, we're seeing a shift from a culture of compliance to a culture of care. And when she actually came back and said that's what's coming out of the workplaces that are participating, that was I remembered again, the slide from the WellWorks program in the 90s. Good question, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. I think the importance of an integrated approach is actually seeing the whole person. So it's actually a holistic approach, and it's not just seeing the person at work and negating what is actually happening at home. So there's a recognition that The whole person comes to work, and that's the approach that we need to take. I've also seen approaches where it's not integrated, where it doesn't work. So, for example, promoting the positive. Well, let's just give everyone resilience training, but we're not actually going to address what the working conditions are at work. Doesn't work. People are struggling in the workplace. Well, let's just tell them about our EAP, but let's not be supportive about that. Let's just give them a card, but not really explain how the workplace is actually going to support that. Or from I guess a legislative compliance point of view, let's just looking at what the minimum legislative requirements are. So I think all three need to come together so that we are actually looking at the whole person within a workplace. We recognise that they have got pressures outside work, but we're actually there to support them and actually get the best out of the person while they're at work. We're at work a long period of time. And I guess just from life experiences now, having been in the workforce for a long time, I just know that the experiences I've had when I've been in a really supportive workplace that really encourages you to be engaged and thriving, what a difference that makes and how you feel about being at work. And it can be as little as walking in the door and everyone's smiling at you and saying good morning and what did you do on the weekend. So they're the little things that really can make a big difference.
Great. Well answered, all of you. Any more questions? Yes, one right down the back.
When I was younger, I became ill at work, and I was told by the administrator, go back to work hard or be sacked. And the personnel officer said the problems were mental and not physical. I was forced, and I wouldn't get super unless I accepted a mental illness diagnosis. So I resigned without pay, and which meant the government saved money, of course. Now, 5 years later, I worked out that sitting at a desk was the real cause of the problem. And 20 years later, I invented a standing computer desk under copyright with all rights reserved. Now the government's reimbursing the fees of physios who recommend standing desks to improve the health of desk workers who need it. And they're reimbursing the companies $500 for each desk they install, which means the furniture companies are making a profit. So the physiotherapists, the workers, the businesses and the furniture companies make a profit. Why isn't the government paying me royalties from each of those situations?
Thanks for the question. I'm not convinced that the people on this panel would have the answer for you there. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. I have met you before at Simple Steps. Max, that's all right. Yeah. Look, happy to talk to you after about that, Max. Thank you for the question, though. Have we got any others?
Shane, I've got one.
Yes,
if I may. It's following on from what you were saying, Marty, about focus on the individual, and I'm thinking that when you take an integrated approach, it's the whole of the organisation, and you have policies and procedures, and that's kind of how it works. But the potential negative of that is you're putting everybody in the one box, and the individuality gets lost, the individual needs. And there was talk about open plan offices, and I'm one of those people that needs quiet, and I can't deal with the catastrophising that's going on around. And what I see is people isolating themselves by putting earbuds in. I can't do that. My ears don't deal with that. And so I'm there in amongst all the noise, and the people around me are zoned out with their earbuds in. That's one example of I need to be in a glass booth kind of to work properly. But because the entire organisation has gone open plan, that much space, I'm thinking in regard to introducing mental health and wellbeing as part of the entire organisational culture, that the individual kind of not exactly gets lost, but they have to conform a little bit. And whether there's any advice or thinking or research about really focusing on the individual. And I'm an INTJ too, Tim. You're not alone.
I think, sorry, Tim, I'll just tell a quick word because the microphone's down this end and I'll pass it up, is to look at wellbeing approach from an organisational level, but a team level and an individual level. So I think that a really important part of a wellbeing strategy is at the team level, and it's to be able to have those open conversations with your manager. And to actually be able to talk about how is this actually working at team level or at individual level, and then being able to look at what can be done to modify to suit people's needs. But at that team level, it's really, really important to actually see how it's working in practice and how it's working for individuals within those teams and what modifications may be made.
As part of the research that we did at a state government level with the ANU and University of New South Wales team, one of the questions that got asked in that bit of research was the uptake of flexible work arrangements in state government. And it was fascinating. The results came back that there was actually quite a low level of uptake of flexible work arrangements. But when we looked at it, everybody had the policies and procedures in place for making flexible work arrangements available. But the culture in the organisation about the discretion that managers could use to actually allow staff to take those up was not as far advanced as the policies and procedures sort of assume that they might be. So I think, you know, this notion of compliance and having the policies in place is one thing, but actually the leadership and the understanding and the care to apply them is the critical element. The fairness question starts to come into that, and this one size fits all I don't think is the right way to think about this. So if you say, well, I can only give such and such because someone only gets access to certain types of those flexible work arrangements. What we really need to be doing, the fairness comes in, is to what is the particular person's interest needs. So in the team that I was managing at the time, there was someone that was on a glide path to retirement. There was someone else that wanted to do some overseas travel and wanted to store up the leave. There was someone else that had kids at school or an elderly person that they need to look after. And they all needed to have those flexible work arrangements applied in quite different ways. And so on the face of it, it wasn't fair, but it was fair because it was actually meeting the individual's needs. And I think what we've lost in the compliance thing is this mixture of compliance and so-called fairness and managers not wanting to be, well, you did such and such for such and such, why can't you do it for me? Well, it's actually about looking at people's individual needs. But along with that, and this is Marty's point, is there's got to be trust in the team to do that. So if it's all transparent about why that's happening, and you can actually build that trust and have those conversations, and that's the big theme for today, it's having that conversation in a managed way to be able to use those policies and procedures. So that's just, I guess, one small example. In terms of the open space one, I've got my own views on that. The evidence is, I think, pretty mixed on open plan. I'm not a big fan of it. I think people like to come to work and have a place where they've got, you know, their photo of the such and such, or you know, they've got their pen marker in the right place and that sort of stuff. I think there's a bit of hominess about the workplace that we've got to maintain, and this sort of scorched earth. You know, you pick up your computer and you go and find somewhere to sit. It doesn't suit everybody. Everybody's different, as Maya Briggs would point out.
Thank you very much. Look, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'd like to invite Nikki, if you'd like to have a couple of minutes to just recap on today. It was on the running sheet. You certainly don't have to. If I've put you on the spot. You have. But if you want to just summarise what you've heard today in a couple of minutes, we'll make you earn your money.
Okay. I don't think that I can summarise what we've heard today, but I think that I can say that as I've sat here on this panel, I've increasingly thought these South Australians are really onto something in terms of the partnership program. So to be able to have conversations that have involved health, have involved workplace health and safety, have involved industry and skills, have had representatives from employer bodies sitting on the stage as well. I think you can see the different perspectives coming in the answers, and I think that that augurs very well for the development of the integrated approach to worker wellbeing in this state. And I think the other thing that I've really learned, so this is really what I've learned from today, is the the commitment to small business and the very practical case studies that came up, because I thought both Peter and Gavin's case studies were really strong integrated approaches. I particularly liked the fatigue in the farming in the harvesting system, because that had really good attention. Do you remember where he said we really encourage them if they get tired, well, to stop, have a break. So they were really not just saying you have to be healthier so you can work longer. It was an integrated approach. So I think that that all shows that you've got strong policy for this to happen. You've got strong imperatives as outlined by Tim. So there's a real understanding at the level of government about why we want to do this. And you've got a strong understanding that we've got to make this practical for people in small business, because small business is, even more important in South Australia than the other states, or as important anyway. So again, I'm really, and 250 people turn up because you want to hear about it, and presumably you're thinking about it in your own organisations. So get on with it. And what I've decided I'm going to do is I have a column inside OHS, and I'm going to write a column when I get back saying, my gosh, those South Australians, they're at it again. They're just quietly getting on with it, and describe what I've learned here this morning. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Just for some thanks, thank you all for turning up. As Nikki said, it's great taking time out of your working lives to come along and have a listen. We really do appreciate that. Thanks to our speakers, so Gavin, Tim, Peter, Nadia, Nikki and Marty. Can we have a round of applause again? And I'm assuming these at my feet are the presents. Probably not great for physical health, but it does your mental health wonders.
Thank you very much. Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Declare that to me later. But by declare it, I mean share. So that wraps up today. There's one more thank you I'd like to give, and they were in the room, but I think they've gone. Maria Costi, who's the manager of our communications team, and Tanya, who works in that team, who's worked tirelessly to organise this and get it all together. I think they deserve recognition, whilst they've just ducked out. But they've done a fantastic job in getting these talks together. So I hope you've enjoyed them. Please stay for refreshments at our mini expo out in the foyer. The other thing is we do need to reconfigure these rooms. So if we could just ask you to leave relatively promptly, that would be great. Thank you all.